about to hear a revolution in talk radio, Liberty Talk Radio, where the critical thinking will defrag your mind of propaganda-ridden viruses induced by mass media news programming. No BS here, just the facts.
And now we present to you America's quintessential iconoclastic anomaly. Wow. In talk radio, your host, Joe Cristiano.
Welcome everyone to Liberty Talk Radio, America's libertarian voice, broadcasting from our studio in Tulsa, Oklahoma to around the world. I'm your host, Joe Cristiano, and this is your antidote to popular talk radio. Today we are fortunate and pleased to have a returning guest, Mr. Jacob Hornberger. He's the president of the Future Freedom Foundation, formerly with the Foundation for Economic Education, and prior to that, a practicing attorney. But we will not hold that against him, we promise, okay? We told him that in advance. All right? Well, we are really pleased and privileged to have him back today. We're going to talk about a host of subjects, but we do ask you to call with your questions or comments, 646-652-4620. That's 646-652-4620. When you do call, please dial 1, press 1, so that we know when your number comes up on the board, because many people listen on their telephone. Press 1 so we know that you want to ask a question or make a comment. Jacob, welcome to our program.
Oh, great to be back here, Joe. Thanks for having me again.
Well, you know, Jacob, the other day, I had, in fact, on a couple occasions in the past couple of weeks, I had occasion to speak to people about, you know, what my station is about, where we are as Americans, and there seems to be such a convoluted thought process that it is difficult to have a conversation. And what I recommended to these two people I was speaking with, them both relatively young. Of course, everyone is relatively young compared to me. But I said, there are 4 movies that I'd like for you to see, or 1 book and 4 movies. I said, the first one is George Orwell, 1984. I said, absolutely a must read. I said, then I want you to look at the first Star Wars movie that came out in 1970, whatever, 1970s. You know, Star Wars, the first one.
Episode 4.
What?
It's episode 4.
Episode 4. The
Yes.
first one is episode
Yeah.
4. How did
Yeah.
that?
But the prequels.
Okay,
Yeah, so it's Star
he
Wars
just
episode
confused
4.
me. Now I have a headache. It's episode 4, but it was the first movie. Don't ask me why. The third one was, I said, I'd like you to watch The Matrix, and then Avatar. I said, when you watch those movies, don't look at them just as a movie. Think about why they produced those movies and what is the message. And now I haven't spoken with them since, but it sure seems to me, Jacob, that today we actually live in a matrix. When you watch television, everyone who's driving a new car is smiling. I have never in my life ever seen anyone smiling in a car, not while they're driving at least. And you know, people are shopping, they're smiling. I never see anyone smiling when they're shopping. In fact, they're kind of grumpy, if you will. You know, they don't want to be shopping. In other words, we keep on giving this impression of living in a world that truly doesn't exist. Our school systems do the same thing. And so as we graduate through our society, we don't seem to be getting any wiser. We appear to become more indoctrinated in thinking that the world is what we see, not what it really is. And it's about ready to drive me nuts. And I don't know if you see things the same way, and if some of the problems that you face in encountering other people in their way of thinking, whether or not that fits the same paradigm.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, I think my very favorite quote of all time is a quote by Johann Goethe that I think perfectly sums up the plight of the American people of our time. It says, "None are more hopelessly enslaved than those who falsely believe they are free." Now, obviously, if you think you're free and you're not, then you have no incentive to break the chains.
Right.
And in fact, you're going to express gratitude for, hey, thank you for letting me serve you, Caesar, because you brought me freedom as I became your slave. Well, that is the plight of the American people, certainly since the end of World War II. and even before, because we live in what's called a welfare state. That is a society in which the government's main purpose is to take money from one group of people and give it to another group of people. We also live in what's called a warfare state, a national security state, where the government is killing and bombing and assassinating people and torturing people on a daily basis in foreign countries. The American people go blithely through this welfare warfare state in life, thanking that themselves that we live in a free society, that everything's normal. They go to the ball games and they praise the troops for defending our free society, when actually it's the exact opposite. We live in a very dysfunctional society precisely because of these two apparatuses, neither of which existed, Joe, for more than 125 years of American history. Now, American ancestors believed they were free, but they lived in a totally different system under which Americans live today, which is a welfare warfare state. And I think that's our biggest challenge as libertarians. We have broken free of that indoctrination. We have escaped the matrix.
Right.
We see the scales have dropped from our eyes. Our job is to help our fellow Americans get the scales to drop from their eyes so that they see reality and the truth the same way.
And it also seems that if you watch the Matrix series, that the obstacles that they face and the odds that are against them are very similar to ours. I mean, of course, it's different, but the odds are about the same, and it's almost as frustrating. I attempted to watch part of the Democrat debate, and I got through about 15 minutes. Maybe, and that was it. I watched maybe a few more minutes longer than that on the Republican debate. Couldn't take it anymore. But the reason that I stopped watching it is because when they ask questions like, do you love your country? They say, of course, America is the greatest country in the world. Well, we're not. No one said, yes, I love the country the way it was run 110 years ago. No one said that. When it comes to the troops, we don't mention the fact that we are taking young men who have been indoctrinated to think that what we are doing is good. And of course, we have the official title of the world's policeman, so we have to do this. And they go there to kill people. And many of these soldiers don't lose their lives in battle. They lose their lives to suicide because they realize that they cannot live with themselves anymore. But no one faces any of that. That does not exist in the Matrix.
Well, no, because it's all for freedom. You see, whatever they're doing is for freedom. On the warfare state side, they're intervening in foreign countries. Look at the disaster they've left Iraq. I mean, the intervention in Iraq, the invasion of this country whose government had never attacked the United States, that invasion gives direct rise to ISIS, which now is involved in killing and beheading people, and then that gives them the excuse for doubling down, saying, "Oh, well, now we have to fight ISIS," and it's a never-ending process. And in the process, they make us less safe because then they say, "Well, we have to keep you safe from all these people whose surviving family members and friends are coming to get us because of what we're doing to them over there." So that's where we end up with this giant surveillance scheme, which is really inherent to totalitarian regimes. You've got a secret intelligence force, the CIA, which again is part of totalitarian regimes, and a giant standing military establishment, what President Eisenhower called the military-industrial complex. And I'm glad you brought up Star Wars, because that's really what we're facing, is you got this giant military empire that's maintaining order and stability in the universe. I mean, that's what they always say when they invade these countries. Well, they never establish order and stability. We can see that in Iraq, Syria, Libya, Yemen, Afghanistan. And yet over here, they're establishing order and stability through a massive surveillance scheme, not to mention the fact that they now wield the power to round up Americans, put them in military dungeons, assassinate them. They're even assassinating Americans with no trial, no due process of law. And here we are, a large number of Americans within the matrix saying, but Jacob, this is all freedom. It's like 1984. Freedom is slavery. War is peace. And it's really those of us who are libertarians that are saying, break out of this, break free of this.
You know, when they asked the question at the Republican debate, not of all of them, because I think Rand Paul would have answered differently. it was, would you trade your freedom for security? And most of them said yes. And not one of them said, when you trade your freedom for liberty, you get neither. Not one of them. And I said, where have these people been? I mean, what planet have they grown up on? Have they not read anything at all? What do they read? I mean, other than Playboy magazine, what do they say?
Well, they have traded liberty for security. And yeah, it really is disappointing to see people willing to do that. It's shocking. I mean, to me, I disfavor this warfare state, this national security apparatus. I personally believe it is the greatest mistake in American history to have adopted this apparatus and grafted it onto our original governmental system. And they have made America less safe. But as far as I'm concerned, Joe, they all the risks to my life, because they're making people angry over there with terrorist retaliation, I'll take my chances. Just don't take my freedom away. I don't want to be enslaved in order to be kept safe, especially from the enemies that they themselves are producing with their policies. I'll take my chances with the terrorists. I don't want an NSA spying on me and monitoring my telephone calls in the name of keeping me safe. And you're right. It's absolutely shocking when you hear Americans saying, oh, anything to be kept safe, anything, I'm willing to trade, liberty, anything. I mean, that's just, it's un-American, really.
Well, to me, it's so illogical, and people don't see it. It rubs me the wrong way, because it's not a matter of, there's a close tie of A or B. I mean, just think, the countries that we're in are in third world countries. They're mostly impoverished. 99% of the people are living in subsistence, and when they get up in the morning, their main objective is to make it through the day, to see if they can get, if they were lucky, they get some clean water, they can have some food, and maybe there's some work that can be done where they can trade their labor for some goods. I mean, but to the American mind, boy, if we don't have troops over there, when these people who are near starvation, if we don't have our troops over there, they want to come here and kill us. Well, they don't even know who us is, number one. And the condition that they're in, the last thing in the world that's of concern to them is leaving their country, which they can't do because they don't even have enough money for a glass of water. They're going to come to the United States and destroy us? I mean, to me, the whole concept is beyond being a lunatic, because the only reason why they're fighting us is because we're there telling them what to do, and we're imposing restrictions on them. They are sick and tired, and they are starting to fight back on their turf, on their terms. And if it was us, we would do the same thing, probably even worse.
Well, Ron Paul in that famous presidential debate in the 2008 race pointed this out, and the statists hate this when he said, the reason that they came over here on 9/11 is because we, referring to the U.S. government, was over there first killing them.
Right. And
that had happened in the 93 attack on the World Trade Center. In fact, when they brought one of the co-conspirators to that attack at trial, he told the federal judge at his sentencing hearing, the reason I did this to the World Trade Center was because of what you have done with your sanctions that are killing hundreds of thousands of children in Iraq, with your foreign policies over here where you have your troops near our Islamic holy lands. And so I have called this post 9/11 interventionism the greatest terrorist producing machine in history. The more people they kill on a daily basis, whether it's wedding parties or even enemy combatants, they have families, they have loved ones.
Right.
The more people they kill, 10 more pop up and wreak revenge and seek revenge. And so this is a never-ending process. And you're right, they use as the excuse, we have to kill them first before they come over here and kill us. Well, how's that working out? Look at those millions of refugees that are now fleeing into Europe. Regular, ordinary people, they're fleeing the devastation that the U.S. has wreaked in the Middle East. It's time to just end all this, Joe. They've had, what, 14 years now in Afghanistan, and now Obama's saying, I need to stay there longer, I need to keep the troops there longer to kill more people. When does this finally end? And as I wrote in an article the other day, how can anybody in good conscience and with rationality really be an interventionist anymore?
Yeah.
I mean, they've had carte blanche to remake the Middle East, and look at the disaster they have produced. If there was ever a living argument for the end of empire and interventionism, it's these countries: Libya, Syria, Yemen, Iraq, Afghanistan, and the rest of them.
Well, the conclusion that I come to is that our leaders are not concerned about the long-term ability of the United States of being a democratic country. Their concern is what they get out of the warfare state at this point in time. They know when to eject, when to get out, and they'll leave us with the spoils, which is going to be a terrible situation. I mean, it has absolutely nothing to do with our freedoms, with the United States being a world trading power or anything like that. It just has to do with what they achieve, because there is no money in peace. I tell people this all the time. You have to understand, if we were at peace, the people would gain by it. We would all monetarily gain by peace. We would all become wealthy if we had peace and we had free trade. The only time the bureaucrats make money is when we are at war. They love war. That impoverishes the people, it subjugates the people, and they get rich and they get more powerful. So don't expect anything but war from these characters.
Yeah, it's a big racket. Smedley Butler once a racket. Well, this whole warfare state is a racket. You're absolutely right. When President Eisenhower delivered his famous farewell address, it was really probably the second most remarkable address in U.S. history, second only to George Washington, where he said, this new way of life, this military-industrial complex, has fundamentally altered America's governmental system. Now, he argued that it was necessary because of the Cold War. I question that. I think that it was the worst mistake in the world to adopt this totalitarian-like structure in the name of fighting totalitarianism. But you're right. It's turned out to be an enormous racket where you've got, quote, defense contractors, armies of defense contractors that are feeding at the public trough. And they have to keep this thing going. Number one, fear is the coin of the realm. They've got to keep everybody afraid. And that's what Senator Arthur Vandenberg told President Truman at the very inception of the national security apparatus. In order to get this passed, you have to scare the hell out of the American people.
Right.
And so they keep these wars constantly going. War on terrorism, war in Iraq, war in Al-Qaeda, war on ISIS, in order to keep the people all stirred up, in order to keep the tax money flowing from the IRS into these military defense contractors.
Yeah. What I would love to hear the President of the United States or any high official, congressman or senator talk about is that when they talk about the troops in Afghanistan, I'd like for them to state how many of them are in fact contract laborers. I mean, they're not U.S. troops. They are really hired hands making $150,000 a year each. And the only reason why they're there is because they're becoming very, very wealthy being there. And they have no interest in winning the war. They have no interest in gaining peace. They just have interest in perpetuating what is going on now, because if they win, they're out of a job.
Well, that's right. I mean, this is about money, and it's about hegemony, control, putting our people in public office, if you will, all over the world. I mean, this is the way empires talk. That other countries are rivals, and I mean, this has absolutely nothing to do with the founding principles of America. We were founded as a constitutionally limited government republic. No standing army, no CIA, no NSA, no foreign interventionism. I mean, one of the greatest speeches in U.S. history is John Quincy Adams' speech before Congress on the 4th of July, 1821, where he said, look, a lot of bad things happen in the world. But this government is not going to abroad in search of monsters to destroy. Instead, it's going to focus its attention on trying to produce a free society here in America. Now, we know in 1821 there was a big violation of freedom. There was slavery. There was other violations. But by and large, as America progressed and broke the backs of slavery in the latter part of the 1800s, there really was this sense of a limited government, sound money, gold and silver coins were the official money, no income tax, no IRS, no drug laws, no standing army, no Federal Reserve System. It was the most remarkable system that has ever been developed. A perfectly libertarian society? No. But boy, it came as close as any society in history has come. And that's what we need to build on, because what they've done with this welfare warfare state, they are destroying our country, Joe. Financially, they're destroying it. Economically, and this terrorist business are destroying it.
Well, I have heard very little, if anything, about any libertarians running for office. The Republicans talk about the warfare state, and then the Democrats talk about the welfare state. And in the Democrat debate, when they brought up, like, we're going to provide free schooling and free college and free this and free that, everyone's cheering. We're going to socialize this. They're cheering. I'm thinking, why are you cheering? You should be booing. You should be saying, no, wait a minute, this is America. This isn't Europe, and this is not the Soviet Union. This is America. And yet people could not make that distinction. They were actually applauding reverting back to a socialistic or communistic or fascist type of society. And no one took objection to that. None of the people on stage, and neither any people in the audience. And I thought to myself, there's no way out of this. I mean, it's either pick up your stuff and leave, or live with what you got.
Well, Americans have become accustomed to the notion on the welfare state side of this thing that the purpose of government is to take care of people. I mean, it's a shocking notion that, if you go back in history, Democrats were once libertarians in this sense. If you look at Grover Cleveland's veto bill for a farm bill for Texas farmers, the Congress had enacted a $10,000 relief bill because Texas farmers were suffering from a drought. Grover Cleveland vetoed the bill and said it is not the responsibility of government to take care of the citizenry. Well, nowadays, Republicans and Democrats are not any different. They may argue on whether there should be funding for the arts or food stamps or whatever, but they both agree that it is the fundamental role of government to take care of people. And of course, the crown jewel of the welfare state is Social Security. But you got Medicare and Medicaid and education grants and farm subsidies and aid to dictatorships. I mean, it's all this transfer mindset that, as you point out, exists in socialist countries. It's not a coincidence that if you go to Cuba, which is a socialist country, you're going to find Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, farm subsidies, income taxation, and all the rest, because these are core elements of socialism. Keep in mind that America never had these kind of programs for the first 125 years of American history. Yeah. Now, people kept everything they earned. There was no income tax. And by the way, not only did this produce the greatest outburst of creative, prosperous energy that mankind has ever seen, there was also the greatest outburst of charitable activity. This is how the churches got built, the museums, the opera houses, the food kitchens. I mean, so you had poor people getting wealthy because they got to keep everything they earned, and then the truly destitute were assisted with voluntary charity. It was a remarkable society. And yet Americans today say, oh no, it's the same thing. We live in a free society. This is the free market. The welfare state is freedom. Going back to your concept of 1984, where George Orwell was pointing out the destruction of the American language. Yeah. English language, sorry.
I had an opportunity to, someone called me from my old alma mater and asked me for money. And normally I give, but I said, wait, I have a couple of questions for you. I said, do you not accept, the students that go to the school today, many of them have student loans from the government. They said, yes. I said, well, do you know, many of those students are not going to be able to pay their bill. They're going to graduate with a $50,000 to $75,000 and even more in student loans, and they're going to have difficulty finding a job. Many of these are going to wind up as bad debts. Who do you think is going to pay that bad debt? Well, she didn't know. I said, well, you're speaking to them. I'm one of them. I'm one that's going to pay the bad debt through my taxes. So I am, in effect now, the government is forcing me to subsidize people to go to school when maybe they shouldn't. Maybe they should become an auto mechanic, an airline mechanic, a carpenter or something, a tradesman. But they're going to school because they're getting what they think is free money. And I said, what is the cost of a credit hour? And I forgot what she told me. It was between $400 and $500 a credit hour. I almost fell off my chair. I said, when I went to school, and this is a very, very good college in New York, Pace College, very well known, in New York in the financial community. And I said, I went there and it was $4,000 for 4 years. It was $1,000 a year. I said, what is it now? And I forgot the number she gave me, but it was like 70,000 or something like that. I said, and why do you think it's so high? And she didn't know. I said, I can't believe you don't know that. I said, it may be because of supply and demand. When there is a tremendous supply because people can go to school with government money, the schools raise the tuition. And what do they do with that money? What has your school done? She didn't know what the school does. I said, it's much higher than it used to be, and it would be much higher under a normal situation, without government subsidies. I said, maybe it would be $75 an hour or $100 an hour per credit hour. So in effect, the school is making 3 and 4 times as much as it normally would be in a free enterprise system. I said, what is the school doing with the money? And she didn't know. I said, I can tell you, they're building baseball stadiums and football stadiums. And I said, now, so you want me to take my hard-earned money and throw it into that pot? Guess what the response was? She hung up on me. But you see, it seems like the whole world is going nuts. I mean, nothing makes sense. And here's a college student, who cannot even discuss the plight that she's in. She didn't even say, you have a good point there, or, I'm paying through the nose and, I have a student loan. She couldn't relate to it at all, other than I wasn't going to give the school, probably was not going to give the school any money.
Well, Frédéric Bastiat, this famous French free market legislator in the 19th century, really describes phenomenon well, where he says that government is the fiction by which everyone is trying to live at the expense of everyone else. And really, that's what the welfare state is. I mean, she thinks that this money is free, when really she has reached into other people's pocketbook through the IRS to fund her education. And it's not the only phenomenon. We can see this in healthcare with Medicare and Medicaid, where costs have soared. I mean, medical expenses, say in the 1950s, were just a reasonable cost of living.
Right.
It was not something that was soaring out of control. As soon as Medicare and Medicaid come into existence, all of a sudden healthcare costs are soaring, and they haven't stopped soaring, and they're never going to stop soaring as long as the government is providing, quote, free service. So if they destroyed the healthcare system, they're destroying the university system, and look how many of these kids end up enormously in debt. They have no concept of what it means to go into debt until they start working, and all of a sudden it hits them. Oh my gosh, I owe $100,000, and I've known kids that have gone to this kind of debt. Their friends are going out and having a good time, buying some nice clothes, renting a nice apartment when they're starting out in life. Not them. They have $100,000 hanging over them that they have to pay. Now, your point is, if they're permitted to default, and right now they're not permitted to default, they're not even permitted to go into bankruptcy. They have to pay this debt.
I'm sorry. I correct I stand corrected. You cannot default on that. I'm sorry.
Yeah, but if it changes, and there are people that are advocating what you're saying, let them off the hook, it's too heavy a burden. Well, as you point out, the ones that have to pay this debt are the taxpayers, which include many of the young people anyway. They have to pay their share. But it's this notion, Joe, that somehow or another the private sector has more money than would exist otherwise. I mean, in other words, government has no money of its own. In order to give away money, it has to take money. So every dollar that it takes out of the private sector, that hurts society, because that's less money for capital investment, which raises real wage rates, when workers become more productive. It impoverishes the society the more that government sucks out of this. And we can see what's going on. The government spends much more than it brings in. This is what's called deficit spending. How does it do that? It borrows the difference. It's the biggest debtor in the world. And we see this debt ceiling debate now approaching in November again, where they're going to say, well, we want to borrow some more money. So they're piling on this mountain of debt. They never cut spending, and this thing's hanging over the American people like a Damocles sword, because ultimately we're looking at Greece, the nation that has gone bankrupt because of out of control spending and debt. And so it's just one giant corrupt mess, this welfare warfare state. It's really taken our country down, Joe. I mean, shows like this are very important because we're providing with people a way to say, there's a way out of this. But if you don't follow the way out of it, don't be complaining when the bad days come.
Yeah. I wish I can tell you I made money on this radio station. I don't. This cost me, but I can't stop doing it because I'm so angry. I mean, I'm just so frustrated. I figured if I stayed home and said nothing and did nothing, I would just feel too guilty. So I continued. I've been doing this now for about 13, 14 years now, twice a week, religiously all the way through. And I just cannot stop doing this. Now, I just wish the word, in fact, about 8, 9 years ago, I decided to give up the ghost and close everything down. And I received a email from a Chinese national living in Malaysia. I'll never forget this. And he wrote this long email giving me all the reasons in the world why I should keep the station going. And I found out later that my second largest audience was from Beijing, China. And it surprised me that it got there because I thought it would be filtered out. But somehow it gets through. And I never forget that the only part of the email I remember, the words that I remember, was that you have no idea what effect you are having. So those words, my wife has difficulty crying. She does. I drop my pencil, I cry for an hour. Yeah, I'm terrible, typical Italian. And I saw her cry for the first time when she read that email. And we've been married a long time. And it's amazing the effect that we have on people. But we're not having that effect on the people in the United States. We're having that effect on people outside the United States. That's what concerns me, is that why can't the people in the United States see this as people outside the United States see this?
Well, I think they are. It's just that something that you can't see and you can't measure, but you just have to have the confidence that truth has power. There's a reason why totalitarian dictators shut shows like this down, because they know that they are having an effect. You may not see it on the surface, but what's going on under the surface is that people are starting to figure things out. And all we need is a critical mass of people who are libertarian thinking to change things, and that can be significantly less than a majority. That's how things shift in a society. Paradigm shifts take place. And now, if you look, for example, when the Ron Paul campaign got started in 2008, and you saw all this big surge come to the surface of people that were supporting Ron Paul, knowing that he was a libertarian, I was shocked.
Yeah,
I thought, wow, where did all these people come from? Well, I'll tell you where they came from. They came from all the people, through the 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s, and 2000s who were out there speaking the truth, writing articles and so forth, and thinking to themselves, oh, I'm not having an effect, I'm not having an effect. Well, they were having an effect. That people were there reading the stuff, maybe individually or collectively in study groups and so forth. But all of a sudden, there's a great big surge in the libertarian movement. That's exciting to me. Now, that's why we need to just keep working, doing what we're doing without worrying about the results. And because obviously on the surface of things look pretty bad, But you never know when an opportunity is going to present itself, something that we can't even imagine, that all of a sudden we have to be ready to go into the breach and say, here's the solution to this. And then you see a huge surge of libertarians saying, yeah, that's the solution. That's the way we go. This is the way we restore the founding principles of this country. And part of it, to go back to the early part of the show, is enabling people to recognize that this is not a free society. Because if they believe it's free and that this is freedom, and then all they're doing is just thanking everybody for being free.
Right.
But once they discover what you and I are discovering, then they start exploring things like reading Bastiat or reading Ludwig von Mises or Friedrich Hayek and other people, reading the essays at the Future of Freedom Foundation and the other libertarian think tanks. And all of a sudden, that's what gets society moving in the right direction again.
Yeah. I became so disillusioned when, I think it was New Hampshire, but I'm not sure. It was during the primary when Ron Paul was running for president. And in this one, the day before the voting, Ron Paul showed up at a stadium or some sort, and there were thousands of people there. People were waiting outside to get in. I mean, it was a mob scene. And Romney, I think it was also speaking in another place, and there were many empty chairs. And there were thousands on Ron Paul's side, and there were only hundreds on the Romney side. But when the votes were tallied, Romney got the thousands, and Ron Paul got the hundreds. And I thought to myself, why would thousands of people show up to a rally and then not bother to vote the next day? And that really bothered me. I said, I'm not even sure I can trust even the election system anymore.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. But I think what's important is that there was this large number of people that were ready to consider libertarianism. Okay, they may not be pure libertarians, but in terms of overall philosophy, they were asking the right questions. What is the role of government in a free society? I mean, that's the critical question. Should government be taking care of people? Should the government be an empire? Should it be intervening in these foreign countries, bombing people, assassinating people, torturing people? Is this what America's all about? And once people start asking those questions, that's a good sign. I mean, I think it's a good sign that there's people supporting Donald Trump, Ben Carson, Carly Fiorini, and because these are kind of like the anti-establishment people. Even Sanders is perceived to be anti-establishment, and I think it reflects that people are not satisfied with the status quo. Now, unfortunately, they're going to people that have the wrong answers, but I think what's more important here is that there's dissatisfaction with the direction the country's going. And when people are dissatisfied, then there's obviously the possibility they're going to start asking questions. And if they're asking questions, they start thinking, we've got a shot then, Joe. It's when people are content. They're saying, oh, yes, everything's fine. I'm a free person. That's when we got problems. Yep. So I see that there is room for some optimism here.
Yeah, I agree. Jacob, could you hold on just for about a minute so we can take a break for station identification, and we'll be right back?
Absolutely.
Fine. Thank you very much, folks. Don't go away. We'll be right back to just in 1 minute. Thank you.
You're listening to Liberty Talk Radio. Political talk derived from a historical perspective. Not always palatable, but good food for thought. Pure libertarian talk with host Joe Cristiano. LibertyTalkRadio.com.
Express Test is your go-to company for on-site occupational health testing services. That's right, we said on-site. That means we will meet you at your facility for a free health and occupational safety consultation. Express Test specializes in hearing conservation, respiratory protection, and employee safety. We can help you establish viable programs tailored to your business and employee needs. For your free consultation, call 918-743-2929 or visit us at expresstest.com. That's 918-743-2929 or expresstest.com. Do you find yourself asking, what did you say? Aaron Cristiano of Ranch Acres Audiology has over 25 years of experience helping patients just like you.
Hearing requires conservation. We need to be aware and we need to be responsible for our own hearing health.
Understand more with a little help from Ranch Acres Audiology. Call 918-749-7711. That's 918-749-7711 to learn more.
Steve Harden of the Harden Insurance Agency has over 30 years of experience designing family insurance protection, including retirement planning. Call 918-488-0024 or go to hardenagency.com and request a free in-depth estate and retirement evaluation. We look forward to earning your trust and helping you meet your life goals.
This isn't your typical talk radio show. This is Liberty. Liberty Talk Radio.
Welcome, everyone, back to Liberty Talk Radio. With us today, we have Jacob Hornberger, the president of the Future of Freedom Foundation. And in the interest of full disclosure, my wife and I are financial supporters of that organization. It's fff.org. That's where you find them. And we do recommend that you subscribe to their daily newsletters. They're fabulous. They're articles, usually about 8 to 7 to 8 articles on various subjects, very quick to read, very insightful, and please do support them. I mean, give your donate to the fff.org. You'll be doing not only yourself but your country a great service. We do, and we continue to do so. All right, Jacob, are you there?
I am.
You're there.
Thank
Okay.
you, Joe, for those kind words.
Oh, my pleasure. Believe me. I actually always have one of your little booklets under the bed of my pillow. I'll read an article. If I can't sleep, I read an article. But
Joe, you've got to read the articles. They don't just come into your brain by putting them on your pillow.
Yeah, I was waiting for that osmosis effect, you know. But our board operator has a comment to make. Would you like to take that comment from our board operator? Preston, go for it.
Well, hello? Can anyone hear me?
Are you there?
I'm there? Well, I don't know.
I think we lost our own board operator.
Well,
I can hear him.
Oh, you can hear?
Okay, well, for some reason it's not coming. It doesn't sound right. But,
Doesn't sound right. I can't hear you.
well, I mean, yeah, it kind of sounds bad.
Yeah,
but if,
it sounds bad.
But if he can hear me, I guess that's okay.
Is it clear to you?
Yeah,
It's all
perfectly
raspy
clear.
here. Okay.
It is. My comment is, I'm so afraid of this, but I think we are a nation. I think the people that are going to be voting, it seems like, are the people that want those handouts. They want the government to take care of them. And at this point, I think it's going to be Hillary and Bernie Sanders as the Veep. I'm so scared that is going to be the ticket. Hillary and Bernie Sanders, and just scares the heck out of me, but they're saying all the right stuff, the people that want the handouts.
Well, I really can't believe that and I'm no political analyst or anything, but it's a dark scenario you pose, but I cannot believe that Hillary would get Sanders as her VP. But anything's possible. But yeah, if they're elected, if Hillary's elected or Sanders is elected, I mean, we're going to see government spending go through the roof. I mean, everybody's going to be there with their hand out, and they're going to be putting money into their pockets. I mean, that's what the whole welfare state is all about. This is the way they buy votes. This is the way they get allegiance, is they put more and more people on the dole. I wish I could tell you that it would be any different with Republicans in office. I don't think it would be. I mean, because they're going to the extent that they might have less spending on the welfare state, they're just going to increase the spending on the warfare state side. So the reason that I think we're heading into some bad times is that regardless of who is elected here, the same kind of thing continues. You look at this, you see the continuity between Bush and Obama. Nothing's changed. Spending continues to go through the roof. So does the bombing. So does the killing. Really, this involves a systemic change, a change in systems. And when people are ready for a change in systems, I don't think there's going to be anything the politicians can do to stop it. That's what brings about a paradigm shift. That's why we continue making these arguments on shows like this, on Joe's show. This is why we keep speaking the truth, because we're looking for a critical mass of people that say, we want to restore a constitutional republic to our land, which involves a dismantling of the welfare state and the warfare state, which means it doesn't matter who's elected in office, because they can't do anything bad to us or good for us.
It's unfortunate. The only way I can see this stopping is if, in fact, we are confronted with a financial crisis that cannot be papered over as it was in 2008. And Peter Schiff makes an excellent point when he said that 2008 was not the crisis, 2008 was the cure. And we didn't take advantage of the cure. we sort of put a Band-Aid on everything by printing all this money, and the disease is still there. It's just that we can't see it very well because the Band-Aid is over it. But the patient is a lot sicker today than he was or she was back in 2008. So there is a date in which the patient will die. And he uses that analogy, and I think he's absolutely right. 2008 was the cure. The collapse was the cure. The economy trying to cure itself, and yet we have everyone running for office saying, no, put more Band-Aids on. Make it pretty. And we'll continue doing even more than we've done before. Forget about the patient. The patient somehow will live, we think, but when that day comes, and the day of reckoning has to come, it always has in thousands of years of history, won't we be in the same position as England was after World War II, saying, we can't afford this anymore? They dismantled all of the aircraft carriers. They started retreating from many of the countries around the world in which they were taking possession of, allowing more liberties around the world and consolidating their power back in England itself, on the island. Don't you think the only way we're going to really solve this is when the dollar literally starts losing its value?
Yeah, that is a really fascinating question, and I've heard this scenario for many years, that if things get bad enough, people will start moving toward a free society. That certainly is one possibility, but it could work the other way too. I mean, let's face it, when there are crises, that's when government expands its powers oftentimes. And we run the risk, Joe, of a perfect storm here, because with all this foreign interventionism and provoking the Russians in Ukraine and now in Syria, there's a possibility of confrontation. And then we're over there in the South China Sea, getting involved with confrontations with China. We've got 28,000 troops stationed in Korea. I mean, all we need is a major war at the same time as a financial crisis over here and a monetary crisis. And there's just no telling what could happen. I mean, when Franklin Roosevelt was faced with the Great Depression, he expanded government powers. I mean, here really was the advent of the welfare state. And then after 9/11, we see that government seized additional powers, extraordinary powers, emergency powers that are still in existence today. So if you have this perfect storm with a giant collapse economically and then a war at the same time, which all of a sudden takes enormous amounts of money, what's the government going to do? And I'm afraid that you've got all these people in the national security establishment that are going to say, time for the crackdown. We have to unite. We have to face this crisis together. And that means a stronger IRS, a more powerful Federal Reserve, start printing the money, just bankrupt the country in the process of trying to save it. Now, I would like to think that the answer will be like, as you point out, that all of a sudden the libertarians would rise and say, it's your policies that have brought us to this point.
Right.
It's time to start dismantling this.
Yeah.
And that's why what you're doing right now and what I'm doing is so important, because we're looking for the people that can understand this now, so that if that day comes, there's going to be a lot of people out there able to rationally argue how to get out of this thing, instead of, meekly submitting to what the welfare state people are going to be arguing.
Yeah, people don't realize that we've had now a zero interest rate policy for about 7 years, and what people don't realize is that when the interest rates are zero, money is valued at zero. That means money has no value if you're not charging interest for it. If I start giving stuff away, say, hey, take it, and just pay back whenever you want, no interest. That means I don't have much of what I'm giving you doesn't have much value. If the interest rate was higher, the money has more value. And people don't realize that we have taken the value of money and totally discarded it, printed as much as we wanted to comply with whatever crisis turns up. The end result has got to be a currency that's worthless, not worth less, but worthless. And when we get at that point, then people won't take the dollar for even the troops in Afghanistan that we're paying $150,000 to, they don't want to get paid in U.S. dollars anymore. They're going to come home. They're going to say, I'm not fighting anymore because I'm not getting paid. I'm getting paid in worthless dollars. It seemed like a cure to our crisis may be a worthless dollar, as bad as that would be. And that's kind of a wacko thinking, but I mean, I throw that out anyways for food for thought, if you will.
Well, I think what you're suggesting is that if you had a monetary collapse like that, people might start thinking, oh, what caused this? And, I'd like to think that maybe we can restore sound money before such a collapse, because obviously it would be a very, very bad thing. But it's very possible. I mean, the government is so accustomed to people around the world accepting the dollar as a reserve currency. But if all of a sudden they realize that, hey, this thing has fallen in value, you could see an enormous dumping of government securities, including by China, which is the government's biggest creditor. And that very well could happen. Now, I've heard people say, oh, they would do that because they would hurt themselves. Well, not if they believe that they're better off by dumping now than holding on.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden you have this cascading effect. But, Joe, I'm glad you brought this topic up, because it really goes to show you what the Federal Reserve has done to America's monetary system. Keep in mind that what America had was a totally different monetary system for 120, 150 years or so, where gold and silver coins were the established money in America. That was the official money. That was what was called the gold standard. There was no such thing as paper money. Everybody understood that paper money was just indebtedness. But gold and silver coins were the real money. Along comes the 1930s, where the Federal Reserve had been established in 1913. It had printed money, it had contracted money, it caused the stock market crash in 1929. And Roosevelt, imagine this, President Roosevelt confiscates everybody's gold coins, nationalizes. It's no different what Fidel Castro did with American businesses down in Cuba. He nationalizes the official money of the United States, and that's when we embark on this decade after decade after decade of really political plunder, of looting people through the debasement of their currency. That's why we don't have silver coins anymore. We have this alloyed coins. We have cheapened, debased paper. It's a progressive thing. If it's not just the crisis in 2008. If you go from 1913 all the way up, you see this progression of constant monetary debasement to finance the ever-growing welfare warfare state expenditures. Right. And we've got to get out of this thing by restoring sound money. That's the most important thing here.
Well, it was interesting, even when Roosevelt insisted that everyone turn in their gold a year afterwards, then he revaluated the dollar against gold, and people lost 70% of their purchasing power overnight. And people should have taken to the streets back then. But back then, people had more faith in the United States. They thought it was being done for altruistic reasons and for the good of the country, and people accepted it. But instead of that happening today on a one-shot basis, it's happening every single day. Our dollar keeps on depreciating every day. As you had mentioned, China starting to sell off. Well, we have no one to sell our debt to other than the Federal Reserve. And the Federal Reserve, by the way, just found an additional $2.1 trillion that they forgot to book. The amounts are so mind-boggling that in any other country it would crush the entire economic system of the country. But yet, because we're still the world's reserve currency, a status of which we will lose within the next 2 years, I want to bet money on it that we do. If we have something like special drawing rights, as Jim Ricketts has suggested, through the IMF, for example, of which there'll be a basket of currencies, of which the yuan and the Russian ruble and the dollar and the euro and the British pound all will converge together into special drawing rights. All the trillions of dollars that are around the world that people are holding in reserves so they can trade in international trade are going to come back home to roost. And we're going to really enjoy our $43 loaf of bread.
Yeah, and that's really the end result of it. I mean, if you want to really know the end result, we see it with Greece.
Right.
I mean, this is a country that spent out the gazoo, the government did. They disguised what they were doing. They hid it from people, and they had mountains of debt. It's no different here in the United States. Now, there's a greater pool of wealth for them to draw on, but just a few years ago, one of the bond rating agencies downgraded American bonds.
Right, with no AAA.
And they got punished for it. The government went after them on some kind of ridiculous charge to punish them. They're just the messenger. I mean, there's no sense killing the messenger. He's just delivering the message. But that's where we're headed, Joe. I mean, the point you're making is absolutely sound, because not only do you have the debt itself, you have the unfunded liabilities, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, the whole welfare state that they don't count as debt, because it's not legally obligated to pay, but as a practical matter, they're obligated to pay. I mean, this thing cannot end pretty. It's going to end, I think, in a very nasty way. Hopefully, people will start saying the libertarians are right. We need to follow what the libertarians are saying, and hopefully they don't just follow. They figure out the answer for themselves. Yeah. But there is a way out. That's the point here. But the way we're going right now, it looks really bad.
Well, my wife and I, about 2 months ago, drove to Wichita, Kansas, and to listen to Michael Tanner. He was giving a speech to an organization, and we decided, well, it's only a few-hour drive. We decided to rent a car because it would be a lot of mileage, and we just took a couple of days off when we drove up there, and we heard him at a luncheon, and then we heard him at a dinner that same evening. His book is Going for Broke. And I'm just about finished reading the book now. I sort of read the 10, 20 pages at a time because it's a lot of information condensed in a relatively small book. I mean, it's about 100, 200 pages long. And the conclusion is we can't get out of this with the way we're going. It's just getting progressively worse. After 2016, the debt line almost goes vertical, just straight up. And so we're going to suffer tremendously in the very, very near future, and there's nothing that we can do short of severely reducing government expenditures, not only in defense, but also the most important parts would be Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and the like, the social programs. That's 70% of it. And I don't think the American people have the stomach for that. We've been reconditioned, and now what do? They expect it.
Oh yeah, no. Once you get somebody on the dole, it's their right. Then that's why they call it entitlement. I am entitled to this. And if I could do a little bit of promotion for the libertarian movement, you were talking about Michael Tanner. He works at the Cato Institute. Right. So if people are not really familiar with libertarianism, that's a good place to start. Another one is the Future of Freedom Foundation, where I serve as president. There's the Foundation for Economic Education. There's the Reason Foundation and Reason Magazine. There's the Independent Institute. And I know I'm forgetting some. And there's LouRockwell.com and the Ludwig von Mises Institute. This is the way America's going to get back on the right track, is to go to these libertarian foundations and start exploring, start studying, start learning, and share them with your friends. Yeah. Because we all have a stake in this. Joe, this is all our country.
I know.
These are our families.
Right. And I'm so frustrated. It's unbelievable. And when I hear people, first of all, the only time I watch television, I watch Shark Tank on television. I love that program. But I try to avoid all programming. I mean, because I have no tolerance for it. Let me ask the last question before we go. Are there any viable libertarian candidates for president that you know of right now?
Well, the only one, and that's Gary Johnson, assuming he gets a Libertarian Party nomination. Right. He was the ex-governor of New Mexico. Right. Very, very impressive man, and he is a true libertarian. And I think he's the only one on the political battleground. Right.
Yeah, because I haven't heard. There have been a couple that I have read about, and I had a couple on the show, but they were just, I don't think they have 30 cents in their campaign. I mean, they're running as a libertarian for president, but they have really no structure or I don't think they are recognized in a state yet, but I had them on anyway, and because I thought they were further along. It was really my fault, and they had not, so that's why I was asking. But I got to have Gary Johnson on here very, very soon, so maybe we can help kick off his campaign.
Well, the Libertarian Party serves a valuable function in raising people's awareness of the libertarian philosophy. And I think that's the same function that Ron Paul served, that he not only brought people to libertarianism, he reflected how big the libertarian movement has gotten.
Yeah. What about Rand Paul? I mean, I have some reservations, and I'll bet you have the same, but I just wanted to hear from you about Rand Paul, because he is so many of the positions that his father took, he takes, but not in every case, especially when it comes to the military, unfortunately.
Well, anybody that grows up for 18 years in a household that has Ron Paul in it can't help but get some of those libertarian ideas.
Right.
But you're right. I mean, well, for one thing, he doesn't consider himself a libertarian. He calls himself a conservative. He's very clear on that. And he's very good on civil liberties against the NSA surveillance schemes and so forth. But there's not a consistency when it comes to foreign policy. He may be against bombing this country or that country, but he says in certain instances interventionism is good. So that's really no different from any other Republican. He believes in the welfare state. I've never heard him advocating a dismantling of Social Security or Medicare or Medicaid or public government schooling or aid to dictators. So in the process of trying to expand his vote total by appealing to mainstream America, I think what happened was he lost his father's libertarian base.
Right.
That he thought he had that base locked up, and libertarians are not like that. If you don't expound a libertarian message, you're going to lose us.
Right. And 42% of the voting public right now are independents. 42%. That's something like 60% higher than a Republican or Democrat. So you would think if someone could capture the 42%, they're going to be a shoo-in. And I think he lost that.
I think he missed the biggest opportunity he could have ever had based on what you're saying. He could have portrayed himself as the anti-establishment candidate that was pro-freedom and pro-restoration of a constitutionally limited republic for our land, pro-charity, pro-separation of charity in the state. I mean, he could have made a very, very interesting candidate that maybe would have drawn a lot of votes away from Trump, Carson, Fiorini, and Sanders.
I agree.
I think he squandered that opportunity.
Yeah. Well, Jacob, unfortunately, the hour is up. I'd like to give you the last 30 seconds or a minute to wrap things up and tell our listeners exactly how they can contact you and anything else you'd like to say.
Well, I run the Future of Freedom Foundation. As you pointed out earlier, we have a daily newsletter called the FFF Daily. We pride ourselves on it. We've been publishing it for more than 10 years, free for the asking. We publish a monthly journal by subscription. We thrive on donations. We can't do our work without those of you that support us, and I thank you for your support, Joe. And like I said earlier, we have a stake in the outcome of this. This is our country. This is our future. And how do we do that? What we're doing today, sharing ideas on liberty with your friends and with your family, sharing articles. That's the way we get this country back on track, with the power of ideas on liberty. And Joe, I just want you to know I've greatly enjoyed this, as I did the last time, and it's an honor to be on this show with you. You remind me of the founding fathers of America. And it's nice.
I know
to be
I'm that old. I know.
No, I'm not.
Jacob, thank you so much. I hope you will accept our invitation to return at a later date.
I would love to.
Okay,
Thank you very
Jacob,
much.
thank you so much. Thank you. All right, folks, this is the end of today's broadcast. We'd like to thank our sponsors for the financial support, and we'd like to thank you for listening in. You can further the cause of liberty by recommending this program to your friends, and let us hear from you. Our email address is comments@libertytalkradio.com. Remember, as my wife would say, you're either allowing your liberties to be taken away or you're striving to protect them. Unfortunately, folks, there is no middle ground. Until next time, this is Joe Cristiano. You've been listening to Liberty Talk Radio. Stay well, stay tuned.